Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a profession from the very beginning of cinema that has been almost completely forgotten. It was a role so important that, honestly, without it, movies might have just been a confusing, flickering gimmick for millions of people. We're talking about cinema's lost voice.
So let's just travel back in time for a second. I want you to imagine you're sitting in a theater. It's over 100 years ago. Up on the screen is this brand new magical technology, a silent film. But here's the problem. Not only is there no spoken dialogue, but a huge chunk of the audience can't even read the text cards that pop up. So how on earth did they know what was going on?
Well, the solution wasn't something on the screen itself. It was a person. Right there in the room, standing next to the screen, was a live performer, a guide. It was their job to make sense of all the spectacle, to literally be the voice for the silent moving picture. Starting way back in the late 1890s, these performers were called film explainers, and their job description was pretty straightforward. They had to narrate, they had to explain, and they'd even comment on all the action happening on the screen. They were the bridge between the silent images and the audience. And what's really wild is that this wasn't just some local fad. No, this was a full-on worldwide profession. It was a key part of going to the movies everywhere. But it took on different names and, different flavors depending on the local culture. The role had all sorts of names. Over in France, for example, they were called bonimenteurs, which basically means yarn spinners. Love that. But it was in Japan where this job reached its absolute peak. There they were known as Benshi. And they weren't just explainers. They were elevated to a status that was on par with the film actors themselves. They were, literally, movie stars. So, to really understand the power and the art of the film explainer, we have to zoom in on its most famous, most celebrated form, the Japanese Benshi. I mean, these performers were the absolute pinnacle of this lost art form. You see, unlike in the West, where film explainers mostly disappeared by the late 1910s, the Benshi in Japan became massive cultural icons. Their popularity was so huge that they kept performing long after talkies or sound films were introduced. A Benshi was basically a one-person show, and it was incredible. They would voice every single character, men, women, children, you name it. They provided the narration, they explained really important cultural details, especially for foreign films, and of course, they read the title cards out loud for people who couldn't read. It's really no surprise they became as famous as the movie stars on the screen. But here's the thing, if you're just thinking of a Benshi as a narrator, you're missing the real magic. Their job went so far beyond simple explanation. It was this really complex, really layered art of interpretation and translation. Okay, so at the most basic level, it was about literal language translation. Just think about it. You've got these huge immigrant communities in the US at the time. A film explainer's job was to read the English title cards and translate them, right there on the spot, sometimes into like a dozen different languages for the people in the audience. But it was so much deeper than just words. This was cultural translation. Let's say you're showing an American Western in Japan. How is the audience supposed to understand the meaning of a cowboy tipping his hat or why a poker game is so tense? The Benshi was there to explain all those little nuances, the customs, the gestures, all the stuff the visuals alone couldn't possibly get across to a different culture. You can really break their process down into 3 different layers. So first up, you have the simple language-to-language translation. The second layer was explaining difficult or kind of old-fashioned words, even within the same language. But that final layer, that was the real artistry, turning pure images into spoken words, explaining the meaning behind a single glance from a character, the mood of a landscape, the tension in a quiet moment. So you're probably thinking, okay, sound comes along and these guys are out of a job, right? You might think the profession just vanished. But the spirit of the film explainer, its legacy, is actually still alive today in some pretty surprising ways. The tradition didn't just go extinct overnight. In fact, one of the most fascinating examples of its survival popped up decades later, embedded right inside a 1947 French film that was being released in America. So check this out. In the American release of this film by René Clair, the famous actor Maurice Chevalier basically becomes a modern-day Benshi. Every so often, he shows up and summarizes the French dialogue in English for the audience, talking right over the original sound. He was a film explainer built right into the film itself. And you can still see the spirit of the Benshi today, for sure. Just go to any international film festival. Who are those people in the booths, whispering simultaneous translations into headsets? They're modern guides, bridging those language barriers in real time so that a global audience can connect with the film. And all of this leaves us with a final thought. Think about it. A director's commentary track on a Blu-ray, a YouTube video essay that breaks down all the symbolism in a movie, or even what I'm doing right now. The technology has changed completely, but isn't the spirit of the Benshi, that skilled guide who makes sense of the media for us, isn't that spirit still all around us?